My talk today, we're going to be focusing on as part of our Love and Liberation series this month. My talk is about creating equality. And what I think I want to start with is a quote from the author whose book I'm using this month. It's Paul Farina's book, The Law of Love. And he says, "Let's be clear. No one is more spiritual than anyone else. Spiritually, we're all equals. We all deserve love, and we all need to learn and give it and receive it without condition. There is no hierarchy in the spiritual realm." So in that sense, there's nothing for us to create. It's already done. We are equal in the eyes of God. We are equal in the spiritual dimension. And so I guess our work in terms of creating a greater expression of that in our current experience, and creating the kind of change that Bruce was just singing so powerfully about, our role in that is to really become aware of the places in our own thinking where we're creating separation, where we're creating inequalities, where we're judging another either higher than us on some weird hierarchy or lower than us, because those are spaces where the inequalities get expressed that can be so painful in our culture, in our society, in our world, in our politics, and all the ways in which inequality is showing up. And so this morning, what I kind of want to speak into is maybe how we move into that greater expression of equality, and how we can begin to identify and how we begin to practice spiritual truths that move us beyond whatever obstacles we might have to living into that great promise of the spiritual equality that we know is the truth of our deepest being at all levels. This week in my blog, I kind of talked about this a little bit. I was working on the work of Carolyn Myss. She had done a beautiful, powerful video this week that talks about how we move through different levels and dimensions of consciousness to bring forth the kind of love that Joyce was speaking so beautifully, to bring forth the kind of love that Jesus commanded us to in the Bible passage that was in today's daily word. "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you." It's relational. This equality piece has to be expressed in our connections and relationships with one another. And we should also love one another in that same way. So the practices that I'm going to suggest, or the context that Carolyn Myss has suggested, she had talked about it being different levels of a building. But as I've been exploring and studying and talking with others this week, I think another way to think about that is a level or rungs on a ladder. A colleague of mine that I went to ministerial school with and talked about 5 rungs on a ladder. So I'm going to adapt her 5 rungs into Carolyn Myss's suggestion that we do buildings, and we're going to talk about 6 levels, okay? So the top level of this building that I'm calling the penthouse, this is what I blogged about this week. That top level is the space where we see beyond separation. We know that in the eyes of God, everything in creation is equal. It's all a part of a kind of oneness in which we can begin to see that there is no separation between us, between the animal kingdom, between the natural world, between anything. All of it is, there's this sense of oneness. And when we can live into this capacity to know the true equality that is in all things, then we're living at that penthouse level of consciousness, that penthouse level of being. In my experience, I maybe have glimpsed it. I mean, I would love to sort of be one of those spiritual masters that lives in that embodies it in everything I do. But for me, it's in probably times of deep meditation or reflection, when I transcend those kind of boundaries and beyond, when I'm not making judgments and assessments about who's up and who's down and who's above and who's right and who's wrong. Those come to me in glimpses, my experience of it. But that ultimately is kind of the penthouse view that we're aiming for. The more that we can embody that level of being and consciousness, then the more that we're bringing forth the kind of love that Joyce was so eloquently expressing in our prayer this morning. So that's sort of the aim, that highest level of penthouse consciousness that the other levels sort of lead to. The 5th level of consciousness that I'm kind of borrowing from my colleague Reverend Darlene Strickland at Unity of the Blue Ridge. I think she's in North Carolina, Unity of the Blue Ridge. Anyway, she says the fifth level of that expression is about unconditional loving. How do we live into that space of being unconditionally loving toward all those around us? And I was fortunate enough yesterday to be involved with a workshop that was put on by Reverend Jim Lee, who for a long time was at Unity of Renaissance in Detroit and now is doing just this kind of powerful workshop work. He and his wife, Lisa, just put in an amazing program. And he talked about this capacity, this experience that he had where he was able to catch himself. That's a big piece of it, knowing sort of where we are in terms of these levels. He was able to catch himself at a lower level and quickly move into that unconditionally loving space. And whatever the circumstance was, I don't remember what the setup was, but he was speaking to a group in his congregation, and there was someone who interrupted the whole flow of things and was adamant that Jim Lee was sort of the Antichrist, that he was preaching untruths and that he and all his congregation would be going into hell if they followed the kind of teachings, and went off on this rampage. And Jim said that in the moment, his first reaction, the first thought that he had was not unconditionally loving by any stretch, but that this guy needed to be put in his place, that he needed to be slapped around but he caught himself in that. He caught himself at that lower level of consciousness. And where he moved to, what he was able to get to, was a space of being able to respond out of unconditional love. And it was a genuine response. It wasn't, he said it was something that he was really bubbling up from within him. He was being this expression of unconditional love. It wasn't just a platitude to sort of say, but he genuinely could reach out to the man and say, you know, brother, I love you, because what I hear you expressing, what I hear you coming from is a real desire for me to be able to get to heaven. You don't want me or anybody who's following my words to be condemned. You're really coming out of a space of love, and I love you for that. I love you for giving me the opportunity to be able to speak into that connecting power of love. And so what he brought into that circumstance was not any kind of judgment about how this man's wrong or this theology was right, but to be present in the room with the energies that were there and to uplift it. That's what it's like in the model that I'm proposing today. That's what it's like to be on that fifth floor of unconditional loving. When we can truly behold the Christ presence in another, when we can truly see the good and the love that they're wanting to bring into expression, regardless of how we might be experiencing it, and reach out with a sense of unconditional love that builds bridges rather than reinforces divides. That's what we're looking for as we move into unconditional loving. And what I know is that I'm not sure I could have moved into that space that Jim did so quickly. You know, I might have been somewhere else on these 5 levels. And you know what? Wherever we are on these levels is a powerful place to be as we bring awareness to it. Because that's how we can begin to bring a shift, when we recognize where we are. So if you're in a space where you're not able to be unconditional loving on that 5th floor, maybe it's the 4th floor where you're moving into, or where it is more accessible to you. And that 4th floor is all about compassion. It's all about, maybe I'm not able to extend myself in total unconditional love in that space, but maybe I can open a space in my heart to be compassionate toward those who I might be judging or perceiving as being wrong or bad in that particular moment, right? And one of the practices that was shared in this workshop that we attended yesterday was this. And this was in one of the breakout rooms. So I'm not sure that everyone that was in the room was able to experience it, but I get to share it. I get to move it on now. And it was, imagine that, and this is a practice that's not so much about when we're being in confrontation, but it's a practice that will cultivate a greater capacity to be compassionate in all our relationships. And it was this: go to the grocery store. Go somewhere where there are a whole bunch of different types of people moving in and out. And just notice what kind of language or, that's one of my favorite things to do, is sort of to go to spaces and public places and make up stories about who the people are and what's brought them there and what might be motivating them in the background. And this practice is sort of a step back from that and to maybe be aware of the stories that we're making up about the people around us, and then to move in another space and to recognize that, just like me, this person is looking for love. Just like me, this person is wanting to have enriching friendships in their life. Just like me, this person is wanting to have a safe place to live. Just like me, this person is wanting to live life with grace and with ease, and to move through it with health and a sense of wholeness. Just like me. And it's in that just like me space that we can begin to make room in our hearts that is a more compassionate space. So what I'm suggesting is, as you're standing in line at the grocery store, look around and think, just like me, that person is looking for love. That person is wanting to embody love. That person is desiring success. And that begins to build a bridge between that person who's separate and apart from me, and recognizing that they are in this kind of life experience with the same motivations, with the same desires. We have that commonality that allows me to be a compassionate presence for them. And then as we can practice that, as we can bring that into fuller expression for people where we maybe don't have some negative energy or judgment around, we're able to bring it forth in a more powerful way when we are in situations where we're feeling more confrontational, or we may be feeling more attacked, or where we may feeling that someone is against us. We build sort of our spiritual muscles of compassion by being present to others and recognizing the commonality that we have in a compassionate way. So that, I'm suggesting, is the fourth floor in this rise to consciousness as we move up to the penthouse of being in our consciousness. So the third floor, maybe we're not able to get to that space of recognizing that they're just like me, that they have the same desires, and maybe we're at the space of, on this third floor, of just seeking to understand. If I can have a desire to understand maybe why that person is experiencing life and expressing in the ways that they are, why they're feeling the kind of emotional beliefs and thoughts, having the kinds of beliefs and thoughts that are motivating them to behave in the ways that they are. It's in that desire to understand. And what I'm suggesting is that as we can create it, as we can come into those experiences from a space of curiosity, right? We're not coming in there with our own agenda about wanting to change their minds. We're not coming in there wanting to prove our point or being right or wrong. And that the way we move into understanding, the way that we embody that sense of curiosity, is really to be in a space of listening. Certainly in conversation, when we're in dialogue, we'll have an opportunity to express our own thoughts and beliefs about that space. But I believe it's more important that we come into it with a desire to listen more than a desire to speak, a desire to understand more than a desire to stand up for our point of view. And it's in that we can really begin to create a space that, because what happens is, as we shift into a space of understanding, as I have a greater awareness or a greater understanding about where another person might be coming from, then I'm more able to sort of bridge that connection. It lowers the resistance that I might have to another. It lowers you know how when you're in those conversations where you might be triggered and you're wanting to prove your point, you're wanting to make sure the other person understands how you see the world, that energy is actually a block to true understanding. That energy is putting up walls of separation and difference, when what we're wanting to bring into that circumstance is a capacity and a space for connection to happen, right? And then when we're able to have the opportunity to articulate our own beliefs and understandings, it's not out of a desire to make them wrong or to prove our point. It's out of a desire to really create bridges of connection. So that third level is about being curious. That third level is really about really desiring to understand another's point of view and not to prove our own point, not to prove that we're right and they're wrong. So that third level is rising up into a space of being able to understand. And in all conscious, and truth be told, there may be times, and we may be encountering situations and people in our lives when we aren't even willing to understand. We're not even in a space where we can open that connecting bridge. And in that space, I'd say we're on the second floor of this rise in consciousness in this high rise we're building. The second floor is about cultivating just a sense of willingness, like to be in a space of, God, I recognize that I don't even care what that other person thinks. I don't have a capacity or a ability to be curious in this moment, but I am willing to. I am willing to look at my own belief. I am willing to be present to my own blocks. I am willing to be present to the ways and the emotional baggage that I'm bringing to this. I'm willing to be able to let that go, to release and let that go, as we sang as the first song this morning. There's a willingness to be able to have my experience, my beliefs, my thought patterns, my habits, my habitual behaviors. I'm willing to let that go so that something new might emerge from within me. Some new and greater awareness might emerge from within me. That second level of building and growing, right? Whew. So, that said, there are times in our experience when we might not even be able to be willing. If we're completely honest about what's happening in our hearts, there may well be times in our experience when we're not even able to cultivate that capacity for willingness, when we are so in our own stuff, when we are still so in our own drama, and so maybe in our own pain and in our own feelings of being victimized, that we're not able to be willing. It's okay. There are times in our human experience when that's the level of consciousness that we're able to engage in. And if that's where we are, then the most powerful way forward, the most powerful way to sort of bring a grounding on this first level of understanding is to do no harm, right? The first thing, and the way we do no harm, is to tend to our own hurts, to tend to our own wounding, to tend into that in us, which is still so defensive and so hurt and so stuck in judgments and condemnations that we're not able to move up into those higher levels of awareness and understanding. And I want to share with you a beautiful expression of that I heard just this morning, and it's by an artist, a musician, whom I adore. His work I think I find so healing and wonderful. His name is Craig Minowa. The band that he founded is called Cloud Cult. I did a whole series not too long ago about his music. But he was on this morning talking about the birthday of his son Caden. The whole band sort of changed its trajectory a few years ago. He said this would have been Caden's 21st birthday. But when Caden was 2 years old, so this was 19 years ago, he passed away from SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, and it devastated his parents. They were in such deep grief that they weren't able to move forward. And so Craig, what he realized this morning on the 21st anniversary of his son Caden's death is that pain is still with him. He is still feeling a sense of woundedness and a sense of personal judgment about how he ought to be further along. 20 years later, he ought to be able to handle this in a way that doesn't take him back to that depth of loss and pain that he is experiencing in this morning. And so what he talked about is just being with that pain. He got up that morning and he lit a candle and put out a picture of his son Caden, and he just let the feelings and the emotions flow. He let himself be present, even 20 years later, to that deep sense of pain that feels just as piercing as it did 20 years ago. And to allow himself to be in that space and to nurture himself. And what he did, and this is how I think we know that we're moving into a space of healing. What he was able to do is sort of change his whole plan for the morning, and he decided to go out for a walk. They're way up in the wilds of Minnesota. They said it was 10 below out there. He was all dressed up, but what he wanted to do was come out and sort of share that part of his journey with his Patreon audience. And so that's what he did. He described his experience, and he described how his hope out of this was that in being able to sort of describe his own process and his own pain, that others might find permission to nurture themselves in this first level of conscious awareness and conscious understanding. And I know from his Patreon audience that there are thousands of people that follow them that have experienced many similar kinds of losses who will find comfort in the words that he shared. And that ultimately, I think, is how our woundedness expresses in a way that brings forth a sense of equality and knowing that we are all in this together. All of us, regardless of what our personal stories is, regardless of race, creed, color, orientation, gender identification, regardless of any of that, whatever pain or wounding we have, beyond that, there is this capacity to know that we are one, to know that we truly are equal in the eyes of God, and to be able to reach into a depth of our own understanding and our own believing and our own being of service and being available in the world as an expression of that love to bring forth healing, so that we might one day know that the change that's coming, that Bruce sang about so powerfully, is actually already underway, and that it's coming into expression through our own rising in consciousness. I'm going to close this by sharing just an invitation. This is from Paul Ferrini from that book, Laws of Love, that I mentioned earlier, that really talks about this process that we are all engaged in as we look for our own healing. Ferrini writes that the spiritual path of those who are committed to equality, and my assumption, my presumption, is that all of us here in this Zoom space together are committed to bringing forth that kind of equality, and that's why we're here in the first place. But so the invitation is, as we're committed to that commitment presents us with an ever-challenging opportunities to give up false and limited ideas and embrace a deeper and more inclusive truth. Those of us who are committed to love, not just those who accept our values, but those who don't. Those who don't. So it means a capacity for really embracing those who believe differently than we are, to be able to walk into a space where someone might be telling us that we are completely wrong, that we are agents of the devil, right? To be in that level of intensity, and to extend ourselves in love, and to know that there is that beneath the outer appearance, that is our true being, that it really rises out of oneness. And it's only sort of embracing the wholeness of humanity and of all that is, that we can bring forth the kind of transformational change that perpetuating the same dynamic and the same energies that got us here in the first place can be transformed. So what I'd like to do now is ask Bruce to prepare us for a time of meditation with his beautiful music, and then see if we can't cultivate a sense of openness to be present wherever we are, and move into a space of greater capacity for bringing forth equality that arises out of love.
Please sing along. I breathe in, I breathe out. I breathe in, I breathe out. I take in, I give out. I let love, I let go. I release, and I know. I forgive, I receive, I can feel, I believe, I am healed, I am whole, I breathe, breathe.
And so now into this beautiful energy, I invite you to just become aware of your physical body. If there is any spaces where you're feeling any kind of tension, see if you can't extend a little bit more expansiveness into that space. Allow yourself to relax even more deeply, supported by the chair in which you're sitting. And as you become more physically relaxed, turn your attention now to your energetic body. This is the space in which our thoughts and beliefs, all of the ways in which we react or respond to life, is expressed. So just become aware of what that energy, what that vibratory quality is, and allow it to quiet. And as we become fully present to this human embodiment, this way in which we move through the earthly realm, we open our hearts to the spiritual dimension. Because we know and we trust that it's at that level of consciousness and being where the deepest change happens, where we move out of an intellectual understanding of that which we believe. We all know that we are one in God, that there's one presence and power. But it's in this spiritual dimension when we can begin to experience that oneness in a profound way that has deep and lasting effects on our capacity to bring that energy forward in our everyday experiences. And so we make space for that kind of transformation now. And I'm going to invite you to bring to mind some relationship, some connection in your life where there is dissension or where there is confrontation, where you might be feeling that this other person in this relationship with you is wrong. You might have some judgment about them that is creating an obstacle to seeing as God sees. Bring that relationship to mind. And next, as you consider this person, maybe you can see their face, maybe you have a energetic, vibrational sense of the connection that you share, however it is that you're experiencing that now. I would invite you to just call forth the truth that this person, true, desires love. This person, too, desires connection. This person, too, wants a safe place to live, wants to experience life fully, to know joy, and to know peace. This person, too, is a child of God, just like me. And in that knowingness, you can either be willing to set an intention to see this other as God sees, or perhaps you're even in a space in this time of reflection meditation where you can experience a sense of connection, that we are one. We are one in our ability to love, and that I can bless this person for the gifts that they bring me. The gift of recognizing the space in my heart that was blocking me from being a true expression of love. And to even be grateful for the opportunity to transcend it. And so now, as we prepare to bring this time of meditation to a close, I just invite you to take stock of what floor you're on in your relationship in this person. Know that it's perfectly all right if you're in that space of still tending to your own feelings of hurt. That's fine. If you're in a space of being able to be willing to forgive and to connect, if you're in a space of being willing to reach for a deeper understanding, or if you're in a space of being able to extend compassion or even enfold them in love and light, wherever it is that you are in that rising of consciousness, know that the work that we have done in this meditative state is deep, is profound, is transformative. And we know and trust and affirm that we will carry that out from this time of reflection, and it will change how we show up in our lives and in our world. Thank you, God, for the promise of spiritual transformation, for the opportunity to do this work together in this beautiful community, and most of all, for our awareness of love's power to bring forth that penthouse level of consciousness and being. So it is, and so we let it be. Amen. Hey, thanks for watching this YouTube video. If Unity's message of positive spiritual living resonates with you, I hope you'll subscribe to our channel so you can stay up to date on other lessons as we post them. Also, if you're able to support us financially in the work that we do in the world, please check below for contact information. You can visit our website, find more about what programming we offer, as well as how to give. Blessings.